I was thinking a little bit about what inspired me to be an investigative reporter. And, you know, we're all inspired by lots of different things. Some of us are inspired by our professors, like Howie. Some of us are inspired by our friends, by a great book that we've read. We're inspired by all kinds of things. And I was inspired by a severed head. I know that sounds very strange, but it's true. And I'll tell you a little story about the severed head. My father was a homicide detective in the South Bronx. He worked in the Fort Apache precinct, the old 4-1 precinct. It was so under siege, they called it Fort Apache because they had so many murders and so much crime there. And he saw a lot of action. And I saw a little bit of it when he came home to our house in Levittown, where I grew up. And he would bring his case files home. And late at night, I would sneak downstairs and I would go through his briefcase. He had this big old Samsonite briefcase. And I would go through these folders. And one night I was going through these folders and I saw a photograph of a severed head. It was a Polaroid. And it was really gruesome, but I was just captivated by this crime, why somebody would cut off somebody's head. And so I started reading the jacket, and it turned out that this guy had the bad luck of dating 2 women at the same time, and neither of them knew about each other. And when they did, they conspired to get revenge. And they snuck into his apartment while he was sleeping. They stabbed him to death. They cut off his head. They put it in the incinerator of the building. And my father was assigned to the case to try to find out what had happened to this man. And I remember the next morning I was going through the file again, and my mother caught me looking at it, and my father was there, and she said, you know, Lee, you can't leave these things around, you know, you can't let him watch this stuff. And I was like 13 years old, and I was completely hooked by what my father did. I thought that solving homicides was one of the coolest things you could possibly do to bring justice to a family. And I really was inspired to be a public servant. I wanted to be a police officer like my father. I wanted to be a homicide detective. I wanted to be an FBI agent. I wanted to do something along those lines so that one day I would look at a file like that and I would see these photographs of a homicide victim, and I would be able to solve that crime. I would be able to bring justice to that family, and I would be able to use whatever skills that I had, whatever knowledge I had, and in a way that was really positive for another family, for a community. And somewhere along the line, I kind of got off track a little bit, and that was here at Stony Brook. When I came here, I was pre-law. I was about to take my LSATs, and at the time, there was a little newspaper that had just started up called the Stony Brook Press. And it was only a couple of months old then, and it was very cool. It was, and it's still cool today. I'm very proud of the people who keep putting it out after all these years. But it was like a little Village Voice kind of thing, and it did investigative reporting, and it had poetry in it, and it had fiction in it, and it had interviews with famous people, and it was an incredibly ambitious little publication. And I just said, well, I'd love to volunteer. And they had ads everywhere, you know, come to the press, join the press, see the world, I think was their ad that they had at the time. And so I went down to the old bio building where they used to be headquartered, and I joined, and it was the smartest thing that I ever did when I was at Stony Brook, because I was just kind of casting about, you know, I was going to go to law school, become an FBI agent, but, you know, I wasn't absolutely sure that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I thought that's what I wanted to do, but when I started practicing the craft of journalism, I just fell in love with this world. And there was a story that really made me fall in love with it, and it kind of happened by happenstance. I had a friend, he was older than me, he was an engineer. He had graduated from my high school a few years before me, and he was working as a contractor at the Shoreham nuclear power plant. It's a power plant that they want to build not too far from here. It never went online, but it came very, very close. And it was run by the Long Island Lighting Company, which people used to call the Long Island Looting Company. It actually went out of business because they were so corrupt. But at the time, they wanted to build this nuclear reactor, and they were having lots of problems with it. And they had these big tests coming up on the pressure cooling system. and the welds were failing left and right. And the NRC was about to come in and test the welds on this cooling system. And so this engineer I knew said, they're falsifying the welds in advance of this test. And I said, really? And he knew that I had just joined this paper and that I was, working as like a student reporter. And he's like, this is a great story. And I talked to him about it. And he said, meet me in this parking lot of a gas station on the Northern State Parkway, and I'll give you the documents that prove it. So it was like, this kind of all the president's men moment. I drive my car into this parking lot, and he's in his car, and I walk over, and I get in his car, and he hands me a manila envelope, and I take the manila envelope, and I get back in my car, and I come back to the Stony Brook Press, and we open it, and we start reviewing all these documents. And it shows that the tests were totally about to be cooked, that the welds were failing, and that they were passing all these failing welds. And so we wrote this front page story of the Stony Brook Press that got picked up by the Associated Press. It got picked up all over the place. The New York Times picked it up. Newsday picked it up. It became a big story. And I realized that there's a power of the press that can't really be matched. If it's exercised properly, with care and responsibility, that the press can have an enormous impact. It can expose wrongdoing. It can shine lights where people don't really want you to shine a light. It can uncover things that people are trying to keep secret. It can hold corporations accountable. It can hold politicians accountable. It can hold universities accountable. It can do all kinds of things if it's done properly.